Malcolm Smith, long considered a powerful, if sometimes controversial figure in the New York State Democratic Party, is now facing the unthinkable. In a shocking twist, Assemblymember Zohran Mamdani, the champion of the progressive movement in the state legislature, has taken decisive action against the former lieutenant governor for his betrayal. This video uncovers the behind-the-scenes power move that's sending shockwaves through Albany and may land Smith behind bars. Is this the biggest political betrayal of the year? It all started with a whisper. Just after dawn, inside the quiet halls of the state capitol, a young assembly staffer, a progressive Democrat, overheard something chilling. Former Lieutenant Governor Malcolm Smith was seen exiting a closed-door meeting with 3 high-ranking real estate lobbyists and 2 known centrist Democratic Assembly members. The staffer stood frozen. The name Universal Tenant Security Act was mentioned, and then Smith said something that felt like a knife. "This is our chance to slow him down. Mamdani's movement is too strong. We can't let him control the housing narrative." By noon, that whisper had made it to Assemblymember Zohran Mamdani's ears. The Assembly member didn't react with rage. No shouting, no storming. Instead, he sat quietly in his Albany office, stared out the window at the city, and muttered, "Another Judas in the machine. I should have known." Outside, reporters buzzed about the upcoming vote on Mamdani's signature bill, a bold plan to fundamentally reshape New York's housing economy. No one knew what was happening behind the scenes. No one saw the storm coming, but that storm was already building, and it was coming for Malcolm Smith. At 2 p.m., the Assembly floor was packed. Tension was thick. The Universal Tenant Security Act, Mamdani's boldest move to date, was up for a vote. Millions of New Yorkers watched live. The bill promised stronger tenant protections, stabilized rents, a crackdown on corporate landlords, and an end to predatory eviction practices. It was more than legislation. It was the heart of the progressive movement. Then it happened. Malcolm Smith voted no. Gasps echoed in the chamber. Assemblymember Emily Gallagher dropped her pen. Senator Jabari Brisport stared in disbelief. Cameras zoomed in as Mamdani, watching from a private room near the floor, slowly stood up. He didn't say a word, but his eyes told a different story. Pain, fire, and something deeper, resolve. Outside, Mamdani supporters cried, "He betrayed us," one woman sobbed. "In Queens, a former leader stabbed our movement in the back," said a man from Astoria. Social media exploded. #NYJudasSmith trended within minutes, but the worst was still to come. Assemblymember Mamdani had been quiet for too long. Now he was ready to speak. And when he did, New York would never forget it. At 6:00 p.m., a surprise alert hit every screen in the state. Breaking, Assemblymember Mamdani to address the state at 7 p.m. The Queens Community Center press room filled instantly. Commentators scrambled for clues. No one knew what Mamdani would say, but insiders whispered, "He knows everything." At 7:00 p.m. sharp, the cameras turned on. Mamdani stood at a simple wooden podium, calm, steady, his New York pin shining under the lights. "My fellow New Yorkers," he began softly, "tonight I speak not as a politician, but as a servant of the people. I must reveal the truth." He paused. Then, with the firmness of a son betrayed, he continued, "Former Lieutenant Governor Malcolm Smith, once trusted, has turned his back on New York. Behind closed doors, he conspired to destroy the Universal Tenant Security Act, not because it was bad, but because it came from me, from you, from us." Gasps were heard. Some reporters broke into tears. Mamdani kept going. "He is one of several trying to stop this movement, this mission to restore our state. But hear me now, they will not succeed. I was chosen for this hour, and I will finish what we started." The room fell silent, and New York held its breath. The moment Mamdani ended his speech, the world froze. But what came next shook Albany to its roots. As reporters gathered around him, the Assembly member calmly lifted a thick blue folder. On its cover, classified internal correspondence, Malcolm Smith. "This," Mamdani said, holding the folder in one hand, "is proof of betrayal." Inside were secret emails, leaked recordings, and private texts, all showing how Malcolm Smith had been working in secret with powerful real estate lobbyists and two known centrist assembly members. They plotted to block Mamdani's bill. And worse, one email read, "We must stop Mamdani's momentum. If this bill passes, he becomes unstoppable. Delay it, kill it, or flip the narrative." The betrayal wasn't just political, it was personal. Mamdani had once publicly called for Smith's inclusion in reform efforts, even through controversy. Now it was clear. Smith had never stood with the people. Tears welled up in the eyes of loyal New Yorkers watching from home. A single mother in the Bronx whispered, "How could he?" Mamdani didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The truth spoke louder. The press room erupted with questions. "Assembly member, are you saying Malcolm Smith committed an ethical crime?" Mamdani didn't flinch. "I'm saying this. Anyone who conspires to sabotage the will of the people to stop progress out of pride or corruption will be held accountable. I made a vow. I'm keeping it." Back in the Capitol, Smith was nowhere to be found. His consulting office was locked, his staff silent. Aides whispered of a last-minute exit to his home on Long Island. Meanwhile, New Yorkers were outraged. Tears flowed in community centers, coffee shops, and train stations. A construction worker in Brooklyn turned off his tools and just stared into the sky. "He lied to us," he muttered. "He lied to Zohran." Assemblymember Brisport held a press briefing. "What just came out breaks my heart, but we stand with the assembly member. We stand with the truth." Mamdani walked out of the press room and into a private meeting with the NY Attorney General's office. What was said behind closed doors would soon shake Albany to its core. But for now, the message was clear. This wasn't just betrayal, it was war. By midnight, Albany was buzzing with fear and fury. An unconfirmed leak spread like wildfire across social media and newsrooms. A sealed state ethics commission arrest warrant may have been signed for Malcolm Smith. New Yorkers didn't know what to believe, but they felt it. Something big was coming. Outside the Capitol, hundreds of citizens gathered silently, holding signs. "We stand with Zohran. Drain the swamp. Expose every Judas." Mamdani, back in his office, stood beside his chief of staff and legal team. He looked tired but unshaken. "The people need to see that justice still lives in this state," he told his team. "No more secrets. It's time to let the light in." Inside a sealed folder was something deadly serious. Testimony from a top whistleblower, a former aide to Smith, who confessed under oath that Smith had sold out the bill for lobbying fees, corporate prowesses, and personal gain. It was damning, and it meant the next sunrise in New York might come with handcuffs. At 4:23 a.m., a blurry video hit the internet. It wasn't posted by a news outlet, but by a low-level Capitol janitor. He had found an unattended USB drive near the assembly briefing room hours earlier. Curious, he opened the files. What he saw broke him. The footage showed Malcolm Smith speaking secretly with two real estate lobbyists and a well-known centrist assembly member. The camera seemed to be hidden in a table lamp. The audio was grainy, but the words were clear. "Mamdani's too loud, too strong. If this bill passes, we're finished. We don't just stop the bill, we stop him. Whatever it takes." The janitor, trembling, uploaded the clip anonymously to a housing reform forum. Within minutes, it exploded across New York State. By sunrise, #SmithLeak was everywhere. Citizens wept watching the betrayal unfold in real time. At a local Queens bodega, a community organizer crushed his coffee cup with shaking hands. A teacher in Buffalo called it the saddest thing I've ever seen in state politics. And in a small Brooklyn church, a pastor simply whispered, "We chose Mamdani for a reason, and the devils are showing their face." Assemblymember Mamdani sat alone in the assembly prayer room. No lights, no press, just silence. He clutched a small Quran, one his mother gave him as a boy. His hands trembled as he turned the pages. A single tear rolled down his cheek. I trusted him like a mentor. He wasn't speaking to the cameras this time. He was speaking to God. I gave Malcolm every chance. I defended his past. I stood beside him when others turned away. And this is what he gave back. Betrayal. He paused, then slowly stood up, his voice steady again. "Lord, if this is the storm I must walk through, then let it come, but give me the strength to protect these people." Outside, crowds had begun gathering at the Astoria district office gates, peaceful, prayerful, but brokenhearted. They held candles. Some wept openly. Mothers, laborers, essential workers, even kids. They didn't chant or riot. They prayed because deep down they knew Mamdani was standing against something darker than politics. This wasn't about a bill anymore. This was spiritual. At 9 a.m., the New York Attorney General's office, OAG, broke the silence. Chief Deputy Attorney General Letitia James stepped in front of the cameras. She didn't smile. She didn't greet the press. She simply said, "The OAG confirms an investigation into former Lieutenant Governor Malcolm Smith for conspiracy, obstruction of the state legislative process, and breach of public trust is officially underway. A warrant has been approved and sealed." Reporters gasped. The room went wild. Then the chief deputy delivered the final blow. "We also possess key testimony from a former aide, financial records, and recorded communications between Mr. Smith and hostile, out-of-state real estate developers." A reporter shouted, "Out of state?" She nodded. "We will not name the state involved at this time, but we are treating this as a matter of significant economic security for New York." The broadcast ended abruptly. Viewers were left shaken. Smith was still missing, but now New York knew. This was bigger than betrayal. This was corruption. As dawn broke over Albany, the state held its breath. Outside the Capitol, the crowd had grown. Thousands were now gathered. But they weren't yelling. They weren't angry. They were praying. Old men, young children, mothers with babies, hand in hand on their knees. Some held prayer beads. Others held New York flags, but all of them whispered the same name, Zohran. Inside his office, Mamdani watched from the window. His eyes weren't full of pride, they were full of pain. "This isn't about me," he said quietly to his chief of staff, who stood silently behind him. "It's about them. These people they believe, and that's why I have to finish this." His chief of staff nodded. "They know you're fighting for them. That's why they're still here." Mamdani's voice cracked. "I trusted Malcolm. I called him an elder, and now he wants to destroy the only hope we have left." He turned to his aide, "But we won't let greed win." Outside, the people began to sing softly, a traditional labor song, and for the first time in days, the assembly member smiled. At 10:45 a.m., a call came through to the assembly switchboard. It was traced back to a quiet estate in East Hampton, Long Island, a known private retreat of Malcolm Smith. He was finally found. Mamdani took the call on speaker with his security detail and legal team in the room. Smith's voice was shaky. "Assembly member, this is getting out of hand. I think we both said things." Mamdani cut him off, his tone ice cold. "We didn't both say anything. You lied. You sold us out. You betrayed the movement. Don't compare your corruption to our struggle." Smith tried again. "Look, maybe we can meet, talk this through man to man." "No," Mamdani snapped. "I don't negotiate with snakes." The room was silent. Then Mamdani added, "Turn yourself in, Malcolm. If you believe in justice, if you believe in New York, then walk through the front doors of the Queens County Courthouse. Face the truth like a man." The line went dead. And in that moment, even Mamdani's toughest aides wiped away silent tears. The war had gone personal. All across the state, the movement exploded. New Yorkers weren't just protesting now. They were demanding accountability. In Rochester, tenant unions marched carrying signs that read, "Zohran stands, we stand." In Harlem, a mother held her daughter tight and sobbed into a news camera. "He gave us hope again," and they tried to break him from the inside. By afternoon, 17 local community boards had filed symbolic resolutions calling for Malcolm Smith's immediate arrest. Tens of thousands wrote to their assembly members. Social media flooded with the phrase, "We choose Zohran." Meanwhile, the OAG quietly escalated the case. Investigators uncovered a money trail linking Smith's consulting firm to offshore accounts, developer payments, secret contracts, and hidden promises. It all began to make sense. He hadn't just betrayed Mamdani, he'd betrayed the people. Back in his office, Mamdani stared at a letter from a 9-year-old girl in Queens. It read, "Dear Assemblymember Mamdani, please don't give up. We still believe in you. You are our lion, and lions never run." Mamdani folded the letter and placed it in his jacket. They've tried everything, but they forgot one thing. I don't break. Behind closed doors, deep in the Capitol, a classified meeting was underway. Assemblymember Mamdani sat surrounded by trusted allies. Assemblymember Brispor, his chief of staff, and legal counsel. No cameras, no reporters. Mamdani spoke first. They thought taking out the bill would be enough. But this isn't just about legislation anymore. It's about survival, New York's soul. His counsel slid over a manila folder. Inside, a list of names other officials connected to Smith, some Democrats, some not. "We found the network," his counsel said. "It's bigger than we thought." Brisport clenched his jaw. "They wanted you isolated, but what they don't realize is you're not alone. We're all in this fight." Mamdani nodded, his voice quiet but unshakable. "Then we fight back, not with rage, not with revenge, with truth." He looked each one in the eye. "We drained this swamp once and for all. It wasn't politics now. It was personal, and the clock was ticking." By noon, Mamdani took to Twitter X. His post was just 8 words. "New York deserves the truth. Tonight, 8 p.m. New York deserves the truth. Tonight, 8 o'clock p.m. The internet caught fire. Local cable news networks shifted schedules. Families across the boroughs and upstate canceled dinner plans. Millions were glued to their screens before sundown. The Astoria Community Center stage was silent. Cameras focused on the empty podium. Then he walked in. No teleprompter, no suit jacket, just Mamdani holding the New York State Constitution in one hand and a letter in the other. He began, "The betrayal we are facing is not just against me. It's against every one of you." This letter came from a grieving mother in Jackson Heights. Her son was illegally evicted last month. She wrote to me, "Assembly member, don't let them ruin what we're fighting for." His voice cracked slightly. He held up the letter. "They tried to destroy this bill to keep us vulnerable. They tried to break me, to break you. But I promise you right now, I will not stop because your rent, your security, your families are worth fighting for." Tears fell in living rooms across New York. Even reporters stared in silence. He wasn't giving a speech, he was giving his heart. At exactly 9:17 p.m., the New York Attorney General's office, OAG, made it official. A red-sealed arrest warrant was unsealed for former Lieutenant Governor Malcolm Smith. The charges: conspiracy against state legislation, collusion with powerful real estate interests, abuse of public office, and obstruction of the people's will. News anchors were stunned. This is the first time in modern history such a high-ranking former official may face prison over betrayal of a legislative process, one anchor whispered live on air. A video emerged of Smith's Long Island estate being surrounded by state police vehicles. Helicopters hovered above. Agents secured the property. Still no sign of Malcolm, but New Yorkers had seen enough. A retired union worker in Albany saluted his television. A street vendor in the Bronx pulled over his cart and sobbed. A college student in Syracuse wrote on her dorm mirror, "Zohran fights for us, we fight for him." The state didn't feel divided, it felt united. And somewhere in the darkness of Long Island, Malcolm Smith's phone rang, but he didn't answer. By morning, state marshals arrived at Malcolm Smith's private estate. The place was empty. Inside, they found torn papers, 2 smashed phones, and an open laptop wiped clean. A cup of half-drunk coffee still steamed on the table. It looked like he left just minutes before. Authorities rushed to nearby airports. TSA agents and Port Authority police were placed on alert. Mamdani gave one clear instruction: he must face justice, not escape it. State police confirmed Smith's vehicle was spotted on a back road heading towards JFK International Airport. His driver, a longtime aide, had vanished too. The media went wild. One headline read, "Former Lieutenant Governor on the run." Meanwhile, Mamdani gathered with families who supported the bill Smith tried to kill. He met a food service worker whose wages would have been protected, a nurse whose affordable housing unit would have been secured, a small business owner whose commercial rent protections were buried in the bill's final pages. Each one cried. Each one thanked Mamdani. And Mamdani, he didn't speak much. He just held their hands and promised no betrayal will go unanswered. While Albany boiled in scandal, a quiet home in central Queens stood in heartbreak. Malcolm Smith's 84-year-old grandmother, Mary Smith, sat on her porch, watching the news unfold. Her hands trembled as she clutched an old photo of Malcolm at age 10, back when he dreamed of serving the community. A local reporter knocked gently and asked, "Ma'am, do you have anything to say?" She looked into the camera, eyes swollen with tears. Malcolm wasn't raised to lie. He was taught to fight for people, not to sell them out. Her voice cracked. She pointed to the TV screen where Assemblymember Mamdani was shaking hands with community leaders. That young man, Zohran, he's standing for something bigger than himself. I don't care what folks say. He's fighting for New York, and I can see that clear as day. The clip went viral. People weren't just angry anymore. They were hurting. And for the first time, it wasn't about political parties. It was about truth, trust, and tears. At 3:30 p.m., Mamdani called an emergency press conference. He stepped to the podium with his chief of staff by his side and the letter from the 9-year-old still tucked in his jacket. New Yorkers don't run from problems. We face them head on. That's what this movement has always been about. Then he dropped a bombshell. I've directed the OAG to declassify all communication between Mr. Smith and out-of-state developers. The people deserve to see what was hidden in the shadows. The room erupted. Mamdani continued, "This isn't revenge. It's about protecting the Empire State. If they can betray a sitting assembly member, they can betray you." Outside, more than 60,000 people had gathered in peaceful protest across state cities, holding candles, praying, holding signs that read, "Truth over treason, lions don't bow, we stand with queens." The message was clear. New York's eyes were open. Malcolm Smith's time was running out, and justice was closing in. At 5:41 p.m., the first set of declassified files dropped. Millions of New Yorkers watched in disbelief as screenshots of emails, transcripts, and encrypted voice messages flashed across the screen. These weren't theories. They were proof. In one email, Smith wrote to a Florida consultant, "If Mamdani wins this vote, we lose our grip. His popularity grows too fast. Block the bill now or we'll all drown." In another file, a voice message leaked of Smith laughing on a call. "Let the working class suffer a little. Then they'll beg for moderate leadership." The state snapped. Phones rang nonstop at every assembly member's office. Hundreds of staffers resigned in shame. Protesters gathered in front of Smith's empty consulting office with candles and signs that read, "He lied. Zohran stood." In homes across New York, people wept. Not because they were angry, but because they finally understood how deep the betrayal ran. Mamdani, watching from his office, whispered, "It was never just politics. It was poison." And now the antidote had begun. At 7:32 p.m., sirens lit up the tarmac at JFK International Airport. Malcolm Smith was spotted by surveillance alone, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, trying to board a private jet bound for the Bahamas. Port Authority police and OAG agents surrounded the plane within minutes. Through megaphones, they shouted, "Mr. Smith, exit the aircraft with your hands visible. You are under state investigation." Inside, Malcolm sat frozen. The engines were still running, but his future already stalled. Back in his Queens office, Mamdani received the alert. He didn't celebrate. He just nodded and whispered, "Let the people see this. Let them feel what truth looks like." And so they did. News helicopter footage was aired live. New York watched in silence as Smith stepped down from the plane, head lowered, hands up. A veteran in Long Island saluted his TV. A teenager in Queens whispered, "We got him." A tearful grandmother in Buffalo smiled and said, "Thank you, Assembly member." No cheers, just relief. Justice wasn't just coming. It had arrived. No cheers, just relief. Justice wasn't just coming. It had arrived. As night fell, a storm rolled across New York State. But it wasn't just thunder in the sky. It was the sound of a community finally waking up. Assemblymember Mamdani addressed the state one last time that evening. No script, just truth. Standing before the New York State flag, he looked into the camera. "I didn't want this. I wanted unity. I wanted us to build together. But sometimes to build, you have to tear out the rot. And Malcolm was rot. He paused. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting you, your homes, your livelihoods, your state. Across living rooms, families held hands. A widowed mother in Buffalo clutched a picture of her son recently forced to move out of state and whispered, he'd be proud of this moment. Mamdani continued, we exposed one corrupt official today, but the fight isn't over. It's just the beginning. Greed hides in power, and it fears only one thing, truth. And with a steady voice, he ended with, God bless you. God bless our brave organizers, and may God forever bless the state of New York. The screen faded to black, and in homes across the state, tears rolled like rain. Just after dawn, Malcolm Smith was flown back to Queens in state custody. He wore a plain suit, no tie, no press smile, just silence. At 9 a.m., the Queens County Courthouse overflowed. Reporters packed the hallways. Protesters and tenants filled the streets outside. But this time there was no anger, only sorrow and determination. Inside, Mamdani didn't show up physically, but his statement was read aloud by the Chief Deputy Attorney General. This isn't a punishment. This is a cleansing. New York deserves better than hidden knives and secret cowards. Malcolm sat motionless. Then the prosecution played one last piece of evidence, a recorded call where Smith said, if we block Zohran's bill, it weakens the entire progressive wing. That's what the developers asked me to do, and I did it. Gasps filled the courtroom. One observer quietly wept. Another covered their face. And for the first time, Malcolm whispered out loud, I didn't think it would go this far. But it did, and the people were watching. During a short recess, Mamdani stepped away from the cameras and entered a private room in the assembly office. He reached into an old file box and pulled out something folded in three, a letter written by Malcolm Smith years ago, back when Mamdani was first elected. The note read, Dear Assemblymember, I'm proud to see you stand up. You're the only one with the guts to shake up this broken system. Mamdani stared at the handwriting for a long moment. He didn't tear it. He didn't speak. He just shook his head. You could have stood with us, Malcolm. You could have been part of something great. Then he looked at the camera recording for the archives. To every person watching this, never mistake fake loyalty for real courage. What we need now are men and women who will never fold, never sell out, never bow to pressure. Outside the courthouse, a group of school children held handmade signs. We still trust you, Zohran. And one little girl wrote in red crayon, Keep fighting, Zohran. You're our lion. Mamdani smiled through teary eyes. Then I fight till the last breath. By noon, the courtroom was packed for the final verdict. The jury returned in less than 3 hours. The judge stood tall and read the decision aloud. On the count of conspiracy to obstruct state legislation, guilty. On the count of collusion with powerful business interests, guilty. On the count of betrayal of public trust, guilty. The courtroom fell quiet. Malcolm lowered his head. No tears, just silence. Outside, millions watched the verdict live from hospital rooms, apartment buildings, college campuses, and community halls. Some cried, others prayed. One elderly woman in Brooklyn fell to her knees and whispered, We're finally cleaning house. Reporters asked Mamdani for a reaction. He stepped forward and said just 5 words. The people won this battle. And indeed they had, because this wasn't just about justice, it was about healing. And New York had finally begun to breathe again. After the verdict, something unexpected happened. Malcolm Smith requested to speak, not to the press, not to the court, but directly to the New York people. Cameras rolled as he stood at the podium in handcuffs. His voice cracked. I lost my way. I let fear and power control me. I betrayed a man who once called me an ally, and I betrayed you. He looked down, trembling. My mother always told me, if you ever lie to the people who trust you, you've already lost your soul. I thought I could outsmart the storm. I didn't know the storm had a name, and it was Zohran. New York watched in disbelief. Some forgave, others couldn't. In a living room in upstate NY, a reform supporter sobbed uncontrollably and whispered, he finally told the truth, but too late. And in his office, Mamdani stood alone at the window. He didn't gloat, he didn't cheer, he just said softly to himself, "This is what happens when power replaces principle." The lesson was loud, and New York heard it. The very next morning, Assemblymember Mamdani made a bold move. He reintroduced the Universal Tenant Security Act to the Assembly. This time stronger, cleaner, and backed by millions of citizens. This wasn't just policy anymore. It was a symbol. In every part of the state, people flooded town halls and district offices demanding their lawmakers support it. Tenants in Queens waved signs over their windows. Factory workers in Albany held signs, "Pass the bill, protect our future." Organizers marched in silence, holding Mamdani banners with the words, "He fought, now we stand." In Albany, lawmakers scrambled. The opposition, shaken by the fallout from Smith's betrayal, quickly fractured. Within hours, the chamber was forced to schedule an emergency vote. At 8 p.m., Mamdani addressed the state. "This bill was never about me. It was about you, your homes, your dreams, your children. They tried to bury it, but we've brought it back. And this time, it will rise." Cheers echoed across New York. People didn't just watch, they believed. Midnight approached. The Capitol was packed. Tears filled the eyes of Mamdani loyalists seated in the chamber as the final vote tally was read aloud. The Universal Tenant Security Act has passed, 101 to 29. The room erupted, reporters cried, staffers embraced. Even some former skeptics stood and applauded. Back home, New Yorkers wept with joy. Elderly couples held hands. Small-town diners played folk music on the radios. Children danced around TV sets shouting, "Zohran did it! Zohran did it!" Inside the chamber, Assemblymember Mamdani stood and slowly walked to the center aisle. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't speak for cameras. Instead, he turned to the gallery, placed his hand over his heart, and gave a simple, silent nod. A mother in Brooklyn sobbed. He kept his promise, even when it broke his heart. New York hadn't just won a political fight. It had reclaimed its soul. It was early morning when Assemblymember Mamdani walked out onto the Capitol lawn. No crowd, no stage, just silence and sunrise. Behind him, the state capitol stood tall. Not just a house, but a home of victory, heartbreak, and resilience. He stood at the top step, hands folded, eyes scanning the horizon. "We came through fire," he said softly, not to reporters, but to himself. "They tried to bury us, but we grew." At that moment, his chief of staff stepped beside him and handed him a small box. Inside was a hand-sewn New York flag mailed by a family in Queens with a simple note. "Thank you for not giving up." Mamdani closed the box gently, his voice steady. "We didn't just pass a bill, we exposed the darkness. We reminded New York what truth looks like." As he turned to walk back inside, the flag flew higher, and the state finally exhaled. In federal holding, Malcolm Smith requested a final interview. He looked worn, pale, hollow. The reporter asked, "Do you regret it?" Malcolm didn't blink. "Every second. I betrayed a man who trusted me. I betrayed my own name, but most of all, I betrayed the people." He paused. "Zohran never gave up on them. Not when it was hard, not even when I stabbed him in the back." The clip aired on state television. Even Mamdani's strongest critics were silent. One former moderate assembly member tweeted, "I never liked the man, but watching this unfold, maybe we were wrong. Maybe he was sent for this moment." That night, community centers held vigils. Candles burned, people prayed for their state, and many who had doubted finally believed. In a home in the Hudson Valley, a father hugged his daughter and said, "You'll tell your kids about this week, because it's when the people took back their state." The next day, Assemblymember Mamdani signed the Universal Tenant Security Act into law. Surrounded by tenants, community organizers, teachers, and children. No lobbyists, no special interests, just the people. He stood behind the desk, placed a hand on the state constitution and said, "We faced betrayal, but we stood together and now we rise together." Across the state, bells rang, flags waved, and strangers hugged in the streets. And as tears fell in homes from Queens to Buffalo, one truth echoed louder than politics. New York had healed. The lion had roared. The people had chosen, the light had returned. Not just an office, but a home of victory, heartbreak, and resilience. He stood at the top step, hands folded, eyes scanning the horizon. "We came through fire," he said softly, not to reporters, but to himself. "They tried to bury us, but we grew." At that moment, his chief of staff stepped beside him and handed him a small box. Inside was a hand-sewn New York State flag mailed by a family in Brooklyn with a simple note: "Thank you for not giving up." Mamdani closed the box gently, his voice steady. "We didn't just pass a bill, we exposed the darkness. We reminded New York what truth looks like." As he turned to walk back inside, the flag flew higher, and the state finally exhaled. In state holding, Malcolm Smith requested a final interview. He looked worn, pale, hollow. The reporter asked, "Do you regret it?" Malcolm didn't blink. "Every second. I betrayed a man who trusted me. I betrayed my own name. But most of all, I betrayed the people." He paused. "Zohran never gave up on them. Not when it was hard, not even when I stabbed him in the back." The clip aired on state television. Even Mamdani's strongest critics were silent. One former moderate assembly member tweeted, "I never liked the man, but watching this unfold, maybe we were wrong. Maybe he was sent for this moment." That night, community centers held vigils, candles burned, children prayed for their state, and many who had doubted finally believed. In a home in the Adirondacks, a father hugged his daughter and said, "You'll tell your kids about this week because it's when the people took back their state." The next day, Assemblymember Mamdani signed the Universal Tenant Security Act into law. Surrounded by tenants, community organizers, teachers, and children. No lobbyists, no special interests, just the people. He stood behind the desk, placed a hand on the state constitution and said, "We faced betrayal, but we stood together, and now we rise together." Across the state, bells rang, flags waved, and strangers hugged in the storms. And as tears fell in homes from Queens to Buffalo, one truth echoed louder than politics. New York had healed. The lion had roared. The people had chosen. The light had returned. If this story touched your heart, if it made you cry, reflect, or believe in something greater, don't scroll away. Please like this video to show support for truth. Comment below what moment broke you the most, and subscribe to this channel if you believe that justice, courage, and loyalty still matter in New York. Together, we are not just viewers, we are the voice, and this channel is just getting started. God bless you, God bless Assemblymember Mamdani, and God bless the state of New York.